Okay, so we talked about the five-factor personality model and its link to leadership. Basically, studies show that extroversion, consciousness, openness, and strong are strong predictors of effective, proactive, and transformational leaders. So the study shows that there is a link between these five-factor personality models and the effectiveness and the style of leadership. As a result, for example, there's a strong relationship between personality traits and leaders. For example, extraversion factor most strongly is associated with leadership and most important traits of effective leader. Consciousness is the second most related factor, then openness, and then when it comes to neuroticism, it is very low, and agreeableness is only weakly related to leadership. We have the emotional intelligence and leadership. There is a link between emotional intelligence and leadership. Okay, so if we talk about emotional intelligence, it's basically known as emotional quotient, which is EQ, and it is the ability to perceive, use, understand, manage, and handle emotions in a professional way. Okay, so it is basically the ability to apply emotions to life tasks and to reason and to understand emotions. Okay, to know the logic and to understand the emotions of yourself and others at the same time, and to be able to know how and when to express your emotions and use emotions to facilitate thinking in order to help moderate and lecture thinking, and then manage emotions within yourself and with yourself and others. Okay, so this is how good you are within these five determines how good your emotional intelligence is. Okay, and the underlying point is people who are more sensitive to their emotions and the impacts they have on others will become more effective leaders. There are a lot of different ways to measure a person's emotional intelligence, basically. First, we have the Myers-Silvery, let's say it's a test. It's basically for emotional intelligence test. EQ is a set of mental abilities to perceive, facilitate, understand, and manage emotions. This test is used to see, or let's say, evaluate the emotional intelligence of a person. Then we have the Goldman that says EQ is a set of personal and social competencies such as self-awareness, confidence, self-regulation, consciousness, and motivation. And then we have Shankman and Allen that says emotional intelligence is awareness of three aspects of leadership: context, yourself, and the others. So basically, it's about the context of the situation, your own emotions, and the other people's emotions at the same time. So, how does this trade approach that we have been talking about for this week work? Okay, we will be talking about each point of these in detail, focusing on the trait approach, the strengths, the criticisms of the approach, and the application of this approach. Okay, so this approach, the trait approach, focuses on leaders, okay, exclusively. What traits they have, what are the characteristics the leaders exhibit, and who has these and who do not have these. So basically, for this approach, these traits determine whether someone can be a leader or not. Then the personality assessments, organizations actually use personality assessments to find the right people for the right position. And assumption, they assume that doing this will increase the organizational effectiveness and efficiency. They specify characteristics, traits for specific positions. They think that, for example, the marketing department will need a different leader than the sales department, than the finance, accounting, product development, customer relations, customer service, etc. So they think each one of these need different qualities, different characteristics and traits of leader. And they usually use assessments, personality assessments, to measure how fit a person is for their positions. The strengths of this approach, okay, is intuitively appealing. Okay, so the perception that leaders are different in that they possess special traits. So basically, this approach says leaders have different traits, and this differentiates them from others who do not, and shows that this is why these people are leaders. And people need to view leaders as gifted people. So leadership is not something that anyone can learn, anyone can possess and do it, but those who are considered leaders are gifted people, and they basically have these characteristics within themselves. They have not learned it. It's not a training course to take for them. The credibility due to a century of research support. This approach is credible because there are a lot of researchers supporting it, as we mentioned it previously. And it highlights leadership components in the leadership process, the traits that we talked about. And then the deeper level understandings of how leaders or personalities is related to the leadership process itself. And then we have providing benchmarks for what to look for in a leader. Then the criticisms of this approach is basically they fail to delimit a definitive list of leadership traits. So each study, each research, each person comes and defines different traits of a leader that is considered, let's say, the basics or the most important ones of becoming a leader. There are endless lists that have emerged throughout history and throughout the researches that we mentioned, and they do not match with each other. It doesn't take into account situational effects. Leaders in one situation might not be actually leaders in a different situation. So the context is really important, but this approach fails to take that into consideration. List of the most important leadership traits is highly subjective. Let's say much subjective experience, observations, they serve as a basis for identifying leadership traits. And research fails to look at the traits in the relationship to leadership outcomes, and there's no useful for training and development. So, according to this approach, or let's say this part of leadership, basically training and development do not work in this approach. How do we apply this? Basically, this trait, or let's say this approach, provides direction as to which traits are good to have if one wants to be a leader and they want to hold the leadership position. Through various tests, questionnaires, a lot of the tests that we mentioned in the previous slides, and a person can actually determine whether they have selected leadership traits and can pinpoint their strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so the leaderships that we mentioned, in order for you to have a revision of it: intelligence, self-confidence, determination, integrity, and sociability. These can be used managers to actually assess whether they stand within the organization and what is needed to strengthen their position for. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day.